Hello, today we're going to learn about line plots. In this example here, Miss Smith is a music teacher. She gave her students a 6-question quiz about famous composers. The list below shows the scores her students received on the quiz. Now notice she only did this out of 6 points. That's why you only see numbers 6 or less. Your goal is to use the data on the above chart to make a line plot. Be sure you write numbers on the axis. Label the axis, write a title, and use X's to represent students. So your goal here is to create a line plot using this data. Now to represent this data and to display this data, to describe the situation to others, you can use many types of graphs or other forms to show the data. A line plot is just one way to show and explain this data to someone else. Today we're going to focus on specifically just line plots. Now here's my axis here. My goal first is to label the axis. Now I actually did label already this axis label as the score, and here the data given to us is the student score. So notice my lowest data point is 0 and my highest data point is 6. And now what I'm going to do is fill in those missing gaps, and I'm going to count by 1. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And I labeled that the score. Now notice all this information was given to me already. The title here, I put scores on music test, and that's the title of this line plot. Is describing what these numbers represent. On any line plot you can have many numbers on it, but it's important that you put these labels so the reader can understand what this line plot represents. Now your goal is going to be to actually start creating this line plot. Now what I like to do is take one number at a time, or one piece of data. So notice here I'm going to start with 6. I'm going to cross 6 out and instead put an X right above 6, because notice it asked us to use X's to represent the students. So that means that one student received a score of 6. And I have another 6 here, which means my second student received a score of 6. Now I have 5. That means one student received a score of 5. And notice I'm now putting an X above 5 to represent that one student received a score of 5. Now I have 4. Notice I'm crossing it out so I don't repeat any pieces of data. Now I have 6 again. That means my third student scored a score of 6. And now I have 4. And notice I'm taking it one data point at a time. 5, and this is creating my line plot right now. Now I have one student who scored 3. And now I'm back to 6. And notice those X's go one on top of the next. Now this student, we have one student who scored a 0 on the test. We also have one student who scored a 1 on the test. Now we're back to one student who scored a 6 on the test. Now we have 2 students here who scored a 3, so I'm going to just continue with the X already on my 3. One student who scored a 6, and we have another student who scored a 5. And notice I've now made sure that every piece of data in my chart is now represented in my line plot. So notice this created line plot that I just created is another way to display this data that's in my chart. And in fact, it's a little bit easier to describe what's happening here and to really represent the data given to us when we want to talk about how students did on this music test. It's much easier to see this in a line plot instead of a given chart. We are going to now use this line plot here to answer a series of questions. So notice here's the line plot again that was created. This is exactly what we did on the previous slide. And here my question says, how many students scored exactly 3? So now we want to figure out how many students scored exactly a score of 3 out of 6, or just a 3 on this composer test. So on my line plot, I'm going to first identify where do I see a score of 3. Right here has a score of 3. Now notice there's 1, 2, 3 X's above. That means that 3 students scored exactly a 3 on this test. Now, the number of X's you see represents students. Now, we know that because we're looking at my labels. We have scores, and each X represents students. So here we have 3 students who scored exactly a 3. And those X's help us to identify the answer to this question. Now my next question here says how many students scored higher than 3? So now we need anything greater than 3, and I find 3, but I notice I see a lot of X's on 4, 5, and 6. So now I need to count all the X's I see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So here, how many students scored higher than 3? 11 students scored higher than 3. Now I know that again by counting the number of X's I see on 4, 5, and 6. This question here says how many students scored less than 3. So again, I'm going to go back to 3, but anything less than 3, I only see that one student scored a 1 and one student scored a 0, giving me a total of 2 students that scored less than 3. Now again, notice I first looked at my line plot and found where 3 was, and I looked at any X's I saw that was less than 3, telling me that 2 students scored less than 3. This question here says, what score did the highest number of students receive? Now, what score did the highest number of students receive? We're going to look on my axis. Here I have a score of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. The highest score is a score of 6. So now if you want to identify the highest score, you're looking at your axes. You're looking at the labels here. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 6 is the highest score that we have here. And my final question says, how many students took the music composer test? Now, to determine how many students took this test, your goal is to look at how many pieces of data you have, because each data point represents one student. So every X is one student. So we need to count all the X's that I see on this line plot. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So again, we have 16 students who took the music composer test. And I know that's correct because I can also look back at my original chart given to me and look at all the pieces of data. Each score represents one student. Now that's telling me that every X here represents a student. So to find the total students, I would need to add and count all the X's that I see on my line plot. Your goal today is to use the given line plot given to you to answer the following questions. You'll be given questions similar to the ones in this video, so I recommend at any time you can rewatch this video to help you with today's activities.